recently. Wait, resume the recording. It's interesting.
Yeah. No, as soon as you start the meeting, the recording is resumed.
Oh, no, because she is probably still on there.
Okay. All right, so ping us in that case.
So how many new cases typically there are in a day, new registrations, as you say?
Per day, I mean, it's not like high volume, right? Once the patient is there, then it's providing them services on a regular basis. That's what it is. Now, we don't have like specific number like 50 or something. No, that's not how it is. Because these are rare conditions, what we are talking about. And so it's not gonna be daily like 10 people coming in, but it's more about what happens once they come in. What we do is that's what we want to track. Registration is one side of things, but what happens afterwards? That part is very important for the families.
Is there going to be any facial recognition for the patient or like a photo identity or on the system that you expect?
I don't see a need for that for the kids' pictures to be stored because it keeps on changing, right?
Yeah.
The pictures and so forth. That's not what we intend to do.
So if you can please also walk us through, since we have a paper-based method right now, what do you expect from the new system to make things more easy and simplified? Can you please share your views?
So right now the pain points are right. We have duplicate patients. We cannot do certain things, and it's not all modules are kind of like a separate systems. So encounter is stored in somewhere else maybe for registration. They do it in once, but then we keep having duplicate issues, duplicate patients. We cannot do search and so forth. Plus the assessment is a big piece.
Right.
What the nurses do, the evaluations, they are much complicated things, and it's not even done in the system.
Okay.
So those things needs to be built into the new systems.
So as per your, as per your suggestion, like what I can understand is, let's say if the nurse has to gather the data for the current and the previous history,
Okay.
I think, is it a time-consuming process for you? Or are you
Yeah.
still able to gather all the information on a timely basis, or what are the actions?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. What is the question here?
So let's say if you're not able to track the previous, history information of the same patient, since the patient is coming after like a 1 year or
Right.
2 years.
Okay.
So how would you deal with that thing?
Right now it's all manual, right?
It's all
You have to look up, and people has to waste time. So hopefully this new system will take care of a lot of our issues for those.
So you have like 5 more minutes to finish your question.
Can you be more specific when you said there is a lot of complicated things that the nurse does in a day? So
Yeah, so that is part of the assessment process. Assessment that they want to be able to track. It's just a fairly complex. So once they do provide diagnostics and treatment, right? There are a lot of piece of information they collect on regular basis, periodic basis. So those assessments needs to be captured into the system as well. And let me show you what it looks like, assessment. What we typically collect on a piece of paper right now. So this is a typical assessment form, and as you can see, the information we are collecting, we are assessing them on periodic basis on certain things. So whether it's a family history or as part of the evaluation, there are a lot of different things we collect. Trauma history, basically for the kid. The substance use, anybody in the family is having issues, anybody taking drug, maybe that's what is affecting the kids and basically affecting their health as well. So that happens every 6 months, this type of assessments. Medical history, current status. So this is again as part of do they have any other issues, basically. other kidney disease or whatever as part of their growing up. What type of medication they are taking, right? As part of what treatment is going on. The social, economic, culture, right? So that is another area that we collect a lot of information. Everything is paper-based right now. That needs to be part of the new system as well. So as you can see, it's a 10-page long information piece, and it's very difficult to keep track of these things. What we have done 6 months over, or how we are providing the treatments for the kids.
So you mean to say that the information, certain information may change over the period of time?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you need to add them, or you kind of tweak them or change them.
Yeah, it's the new
And
rules
that is
or.
the
Yeah.
also key component
That
we're
is
looking
correct.
at.
That is correct. Yeah,
Okay.
because the information changes, the law changes when as part of our program changes, right? We add new information to keep track of it and so forth.
Follow-up to that is, do you want the system to just highlight to you only the changes that were, the recent changes that were done, you know, in, during the assessment process?
Changes that were done, I'm not sure.
Like, you know, if there was a certain condition or something that is mentioned there,
Mhm.
which is not the case now. I mean, which has
Right.
improved in the child.
Okay.
So, do you want the system to pick up just the recent changes or, you know, the improvements that happened in the patient? Would you like the system to have?
You mean the differences between the prior assessment versus the
Yes.
current assessment,
Yes.
right? Yeah, that would be part of the reporting needs that we will have, which can highlight the progress for the kid,
Mhm.
right? It will be part of the reporting, not in the system per se. I mean, system meaning like on the user interface or anything, but that's something that where nurse can evaluate what got changed between these two assessments, or maybe a graph or something showing they are improving or getting any help or not.
So when there is a change or improvement in a certain condition, what is the approach of the nurse in that case?
So they want to recommend the same treatment basically. If they are getting the result for the treatment, then they want to pursue the same thing. If the graph is going down, but again, that's something we have to see and discuss and see what type of things we can do. But that's just to keep in mind. There might be other folks involved who is making that decision.
Do you have any sort of platform to record how the patient, funding needs to be done? Is it covered under the insurance, or is it going to be out-of-pocket expense? How do you guys record that?
That is the county's existing process.
Okay.
So we don't see that changing.
Changing, okay.
Yeah. That is already there. The process is already established. The only thing system will do for us is capture the insurance information. Everything else will be
So
done
the
outside.
qualification, and if they need to check if the family is viable for the grant, it's not under the parameter for registration.
No, not for the system to determine, looking at the financial information, right? That's a manual thing. Somebody will look at the financial document and determine, hey, these guys are eligible or not.
Okay.
Then they will enter it into the system if they are eligible.
Well, and how do you communicate with the families or with the doctors when it comes to registration, and also sending out the letters if they are not eligible for the services?
Right. So typically when they are registered, when they are eligible, they are issued a letter of eligibility,
Okay.
right? So that letter will be generated through the system and will be mailed out to them. That is their, like what type of services they are eligible and so forth.
So postal mail.
Yeah, postal mail. Yeah. Because not every family has email. So, or maybe they may not have access to those internet.
In case of any changes.
One final question. and
Yeah,
then-
one last. In case of any changes in this information or the condition of the patient, improved condition of the patient,
Okay.
how is it conveyed to the, related people like the doctors or the financial insurance providers?
Providers, they don't have any say in the condition improvement, right? They are the insurance guys. But the doctors basically, so nurse will work with the families to basically give them like a formal letters and so forth, basically, whatever information they need.
So
But
any
nurse will take care of
improvement-
that outside the system,
Okay,
that communication.
okay.
Because everything is captured here. Who is a physician and they have the information, so nurse will coordinate all the efforts.
So, are we done with the questions?
Yeah, let's pause that. Okay. So, couple of questions for all of you. How do you guys feel the whole session went of questioning the user?
I thought that there were too many people asking the question and only one person answering it. So it felt like a rapid fire for them because we had limited time. So I was feeling reluctant to even jump in there when somebody's
I
asking a
think he's
question.
fine, he's used to that.
Yeah,
So,
but in a natural word scenario, it would have been more relaxing if the person would be sitting next to us and we should be able to talk more about the demographics and around the things than just like.
okay. From your point of view, how did the session went?
We were asking a lot of questions, so that was good. But I mean, in a real world, I would want to make the person feel more comfortable before going right on the point, which we kind of did today because of probably the time constraint and all the other parameters. But overall, we were asking a lot of questions. And I thought that we all three of us had a lot of duplicate questions, which we realized that were answered one or the other way. They were framed in a different format,
Right.
but evidently, I think most of the questions were answered.
Do you feel that you were sticking to the point of understanding the overall patient registration aspect, or you feel that you were all over the place?
So certain questions were not required, which was going over, it was not sticking to the registration, like the other demographics which were not required. Like
Which is okay sometimes just to get the context
Yeah.
of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But then you might go and say, okay, I think we can put that
Yeah.
question off and come back in a separate meeting
Right.
and discuss a little bit more detail in there.
I
You
had a
can approach
couple
that
of
as well.
questions in there which I was not sure if it was directly related to this context, but I still wanted to know that, I just wanted to make sure, like you always say, don't assume. So I wanted to make sure that if there is any possible connection.
Okay. Do you guys feel that you have everything what you need to know about the patient registration?
Do you guys understand how this patient registration will work?
So that was very
If I
helpful
provide
when
you-
we showed the actual form. That was very informative. And as he said that he's going to email it back to us, it will be helpful to keep that parameters in mind that what is required.
What
What
you're
is
gonna be
the
collecting?
So
information.
right now, I mean, based on the, information that you provided, this is completely paper-based. And we as an ENS service, let's say, like if we are talking to you, what needs to be done if everything is?
It's not paper-based, right? The information goes into a different system currently.
Right.
Assessment is paper-based.
Right.
Assessment is
It's paper-based, I'm sorry, yeah. So like we as a PNS system.
PHN.
PHN.
System.
Yeah.
What are, the expectations from us? Like, once we are like asking questions, are we like at the track for the solution? That's what we want to know from you.
I mean, solution, you are not proposing solution here, right? You are collecting, you are trying to find out what user wants or what is the information. You are, at this point, this is the first one, you have to digest the information. Do you understand
Right.
what I was explaining you?
Right.
And do you know how the patient registration works
I
currently?
think I have
That was the goal.
a pretty
So let me
clear
ask a
picture.
question, right? Based on the notes that you put in, do you know what initiates the patient registration process?
Reference?
Yeah, when the doctors come across a patient and they realize that he needs any special attention and they.
Is that the only way it will initiate?
No, there's another way. They said that if they go to the county and they provide them with.
Right.
Okay.
That's what.
So, do you know what happens when the patient registration process is completed?
The nurse,
So he said that
A nurse is
once
scheduled
the
and the
nurse
nurse-
schedules an appointment to interview and also to see if they are qualified for the services.
Right, so
That's
that's
the
what I'm saying, so you need to make sure you organize the information now, whatever you got it, to say, okay, does it make sense?
yes.
Do you have any gaps?
Mm.
Right, so that's the process you need to do it. So what's gonna happen is Harshal will send you a whole bunch of document that your effort and that you ask it, and he said that he will send you.
Mhm.
So you look at that, look at what information you have collected it,
Okay.
and try to see it as, do you really understand how this works from patient registration point of view? What are the gaps, what information you needed, what information you don't understand that you need a more clarity around it?
Okay.
Okay, so that's how typically the process works, is to get the information around.
So I had one more question. When I was asking him, I had this question written down, but I wasn't sure whether it was relevant at this point or not. Also, we're running short of time. So my question was, which are the systems you currently use, and what improvement you want in those from those systems?
Was it the HP?
Is that something relevant?
That's
at
not
this
even
point?
relevant.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we
Because we
are
are not talking about
rewriting,
systems.
right, the system with the new capabilities and new features.
So
So
they are not.
It's
Talking
not even
about the system
relevant,
at
I
all,
mean,
yeah.
because we collect partial information somewhere, I don't know how that's helpful.
The more appropriate question would be is this information that you collect, is this all you needed, or you're
Yeah, that was the
envisioning
last
some
question, I
additional
guess, mine.
information in the new system to capture?
I think somebody asked me that, and I said, this is what we have currently, and this is
Yeah.
all we
I'll
can
ask that
be able to
question.
capture
Yeah.
as part of the registration process.
Right.
Let's continue, and I
Yep.
think instead of we'll talk a little bit more about the homework and the activities. Should be able to share the screen.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll just- There's nobody in there.
I'm not 100% sure if my that one question was if it was supposed to be there, but I didn't get the clear answer to that. Like the changed information, whatever the changed information is in the new system that you're expecting.
Yeah, so as part of the data collection, no, we don't need it, but maybe for the reporting side of
Yeah.
things, we might have some report that can highlight the changes. That's what I was leaning
Right.
toward.
So I think it's the better way to rephrase the question would have been is how often you do the assessment? Is it only annually, or is it more frequent than that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then you just say, is it how is the year-over-year assessment information is being utilized by the nurse, right? So then he will tell it, hey, we can use it this way, or they generate a report which highlights the difference of how the progress of that is done.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
that makes sense.
So you have to essentially phrase it like it's a lot of times the intent of what information you're seeking, it is not very clear to the
Got it.
user, right? So they often may end up in a tangent. Because what you kind of ask it is, hey, do you want a graph year over year difference, right? Versus more question is, hey, what do you do with that information? How often you collect it? And is there any significance from a 1 year to another year? Do you do any comparisons? And what is the purpose of it? That would generate the more open-ended question from him in terms of, hey, I use for this, or I use for this, or I use this. If you kind of start with saying that, do you graph it? Right now you're narrowing it down in terms of what the purpose that you made it. And he may still say answer yes or no, and it's done. But you still don't have understanding of what all they do with that information. Okay. So we're going to talk about a couple of more things. So as you collect the information, right, you need to start worrying about and probably grouping them things in appropriately. Right? I think I heard one of the question was asked it as a, hey, I think it was more around performance related in terms of how many users or how many cases you get to that, right? And there is kind of another way when he said that the cases are not important, right? So the way you would have done is, hey, can you give me the typical volume of the number of cases or number of new patients you get it? That's the way you kind of rephrase it and then get it there, right? Because they don't have a data, but they will have a data in terms of how many kids or the nurses and the patients we do it. Or another way would be asking the question is, hey, how many nurses are you have typically in department who will be using the system? So it'll give you an idea in terms of what is the scope or the volume that you need to worry about it with the system. Okay, so when you get this sets of information, right, you need to start probably kind of classifying them into the different groups, because then you will have to figure it out. Hey, is this related to the system performance? Is this related to system capabilities? Those kind of things. So as you go through it, right, you will have to start grouping it. Some of them may be just general requirement, right, which is more focusing on what is the scope of the project, right? What is in the bound versus what is outside the bound of the scope of the system, right? As you said earlier, hey, I'm not going to worry about Medicaid billing or insurance plan integration. So that's out of the scope, right? So, but the requirement would be is, hey, patient registration is in the scope, the nurse's daily activity is in the scope, right? So those category comes in under the general requirements, which is kind of helps you to identify the scope of the solution. And you may also have categories in terms of business requirements. Right? So he talked about doing an assessment. Well, I need to capture the online assessment using that form right now, which is a paper form, needs to be captured online. Well, that's a business requirement that, hey, I want to do this kind of capabilities in the system. And you will also have the functional requirements. So now this is business, is I want to do patient registration. Well, let's talk about exactly how you're going to do about it, right? What all information you need to capture. That's a functional requirement. Then you may have to get into detailed requirement. Hey, can you, when he showed you the form, right, he'd tell you exactly what all data they need to collect and how they're grouped it. Right? That's kind of a detailed requirement. Also, one of the things he said is, hey, how long I have to, or like it's how often I do the assessment. Well, it's a once a year. How often I do registration? Well, it's once, but then you renew it every year till a certain period, right? The good question is at what point they fell off the systems, or what point they're no longer eligible to continue to renewal, right? So that would be another relevant question, right? That you would have got it for the detailed requirements. Then there are, like, it's non-functional aspect that we talked about, right? How many nurses will be using the systems? How many average registration or cases that you get it and that we need to capture it and track it? That will give you an idea of the volume that needs to go through the system, right? So those are non-functional requirements.
If I had to ask a question that how much time needs to be put in the training, training this particular system to the nurse, would that be a valid?
So that would still be a non-functional, right? So it's not necessarily a feature that you need to put in the systems, right? But it's something that's necessary for rolling it out the system, right? So your requirement may be, hey, in addition to all these things, one of the business requirement would have been create a training manual, create a user guide, right? Those are still business requirements, not functional requirement, but it's a business point of view. They still need it. It's not the capability of the system. No, they may just say, hey, system should have like it's inbuilt self-help type of capability where they can click it and say, hey, what does this information mean? Right? Then you have to implement that as a functional requirement.
Because based on the complexity, then I might have to rethink the design of the system also.
So
not design of the system, the user interface.
Right,
also.
so it'll be user interface, not necessarily the design of the system, right?
Yeah.
Because the functionality will still be the same.
Yes.
Okay. The other thing would be data requirements, right? What rules I need to enforce it, right? So like it's one of the things Harshal said that every year they need to renew it. So I need to go back and look at it. If the last assessment was done more than 365 days ago or 366 days ago, then I kind of flag it that, hey, you have to first renew it and then you can continue with the services or provide the services, right? That's a data rule. If they say it's how long it is there. Or also another data rule enforces that, hey, there is only certain limit based on the income that they can provide it, right? So you have to understand all of those data rules and business rules. Then you may also have a technical requirement. So if Arshil says that, hey, the nurses are going to be on the road, they're going to go at their home, and they should be able to access it from there also. Versus if he says, you know, nurses will capture the information on the paper when they go visit a patient, come back into the office, then log into the system and do that. That means the system is not accessible from remotely. It's accessible only from whatever the county health district locations are. Right? So that has a different requirements, right? Based on that, we build a solution
That was
that's
a very
different.
important question that you didn't ask me.
Right. Right. So I think you still have gaps when you look through it. Also, I think this is just mine, right? So for the first attempt, it was good, but you guys were not focused in terms of what is the outcome that you were expecting it to come out from the sessions. Right? You talked about it, you kind of went through all, but your questioning was not organized that it can build on each other.
Right.
Okay. Then, like, it's based on that, right? You're going to build a requirements document. And that requirements document is essentially like it's going to be one of the two forms, or it can be, and now Herschel will send it out to you guys a template that you can start using it to put it, organizing all this information together. However, one of the key thing is going to be is how you word those requirements, right? If you word those requirements from the reference point of the user, that, hey, as a nurse, I want to be able to do this, this, this. That's kind of, a lot of times is known as a requirement definition document, which is you're defining it what the user wants. Versus if you write it from the point of that system must allow the nurse to enter this information and capture this information. This is how it allows it to capture it. Then it becomes from a systems point of view or IT guy's point of view. Then a lot of times you will refer that as a requirement specification document. Now you may see a hybrid where they start with our users and then get into more custom specific to the application of what needs to be built. You may see that, right? But typically you're going to see it whenever you write the requirement. Either you write it from the user's point of view or you write it from the system's point of view. So you can't merge within a one requirement, half user point of view and half system point of view. It has to be one or the other. Okay. Then when you think about functional requirements, right? So we talked about hey, what are the business capabilities they're going to provide? So in other words, what is the input, what is the output, and what is the processing that needs to happen? So when the patient registration happens, right, you talk about, hey, what is the input? What all data I need to capture and enter into the system? Then how it's going to process? Well, it's going to probably create a new record or it's going to update an existing record, what it needs to do. Then how it's going to do an error handling. What if I don't give you a social security number? Well, can you proceed it? If not, how you deal with that? Or if I don't get a referral from a doctor and it's required, well, do you still store that, flag it as an incomplete, complete? How do you handle those things? Right? So you need to provide that kind of level in the functional requirements. In the non-functional environments, you talk about the environments. You talk about a lot of times what you say is abilities of the system, which is what is the capabilities, is it functional, but what is operational, what is the resiliency requirements, what is the availability requirements, those kind of things you talk about. Like if I have to interact with the other systems, well, what is the kind of interfaces I need to build it? If I'm collecting it, you talked about the training, right? What documentation I need to put into it? Is it documentation from the system maintenance point of view? It's documentation from the user interface point of view. There may be both classification, I may have to do that, right? What are kind of security, right? If it's accessible from remotely, or even when you do it, what kind of user ID and a password? Is it going to be a role-based security? Is it going to be function-based security? What kind of things I need to put into the system? Also some of the quality. Well, what is the uptime requirement for the system? Is it going to be 24/7? Or is it during the normal office hours only? And so that works closely with is how often I can bring the system down for the maintenance, right? Whether it's a database backup or report generation, those kind of things. Once you collect all these requirements, one of the other things you also have to do is that are this requirement meeting the criteria that the development team can take that and implement it with the same intent and the meaning that what is user meant. Okay, and quite often you say the referred thing is a 3C and a T requirement. What that means is whenever you put a requirement, first you need to figure it out, is it a correct requirement? That means, is it belongs into this? Is it part of the scope? Right, so for example, Herschel talked about, hey, the Medicaid and insurance plans is not in the scope. So if you just put it that system should interact with the Medicaid or pass this information through that, well, it's not going to be correct in this scope because it's not part of it, right? So first you have to figure it out. Does it belong into the scope that the user wants it? Second thing it needs to do it, is it complete? So do you have enough detail, or are you just having a partial detail? The third aspect is it consistent? So Herschel may be saying you something that, hey, the system should be able to do that. Then you go to the service counselors and they provide you information, but that contradicts this information. And you put both of that into the document. Now it's not consistent, right? So if somebody who is implementing the system, which one they're going to implement, this or this? You need to make sure as a business analyst that you reconcile those things. And if there are discrepancies, you go talk back to the user and say, hey, which one we need to implement, is this or this? Because we can't do both, because based on that, it could be completely different requirements. So you need to make sure that it's consistent also. Also part of the completion is if Herschel said that, hey, I'm going to give you a document, and then you're going to use that as a requirement and say, hey, I need to create in the assessment, all this information needs to be captured. And those information is listed out in the attachment A. But when you give the document, there's no attachment A. What I'm going to do, I can't finish my work, right? So you need to make sure that everything that you write it, you look through the lens. Is it complete, consistent, and correct? And then on top of that, you need to think about it is, how would I test this requirement? So if the system is saying that they've implemented this requirement, how would I validate it? What are the criteria that I'll use it to test it? So for example, one of the most common things that we see in any of the system is that, hey, system should respond in a reasonable time. Well, what is a reasonable time? Your reference of a reasonable time could be completely different than my reference of reasonable time. Versus if you just say, hey, system should respond 90% of the query in less than 2 seconds. Now you have a reference, right? You can run through queries and say, hey, what all queries coming back in less than 2 seconds and what all queries are not coming back? And does it fulfill the criteria that you're looking for? Okay. So those kind of things is that. And then as you go through the development, right, you should be able to refer back to, hey, this functionality I implemented because of this requirement and mentioned by this particular user. Okay. Now, how do you go about collecting those requirements, right? So there's a lot of strategies that you use. These are the individual tools and techniques as you collect through it. We definitely talked about the different types of interviews, right? We talked about workshop, different types of questioning that we talked about. But there is also a whole bunch of other tools that you kind of combine it together to collect that. We'll talk about specification by example and a little bit about use case diagram today, and we'll continue discussing that later. Okay, so the use specification by example is the scenario where you go and says, hey, a patient is registering, right? So you can talk about it with Herschel and says, okay, can we just create a one sample? Let's just go through it manually. That this is what all information I'll require, and then when I register, what will happen, right? So this is a small example, right? We just say, hey, it's around the shipment mode, right? And says, hey, based on the type of the material that you're ordering it, we may pick up different shipment vendors to ship the item to it, right? So this is an example. You can say, hey, if I'm ordering a book and the delivery mode that it's selected is a mail, then I'll just go ahead and deliver that through the United Postal Service. If it is a DVD and it's still the mail, I'll do the same thing. But if it's a software and it's a download, then I'm not going to have any shipment carrier. I'm just going to have them ability through some sort of a download site that they can download themselves. Okay. If I'm trying to like use a big ship items that require some sort of a white glove type of service, then I'm going to use a FedEx, and I'm going to go ahead and use a certified mode, so I can guarantee it, people can track it, and that is a proof of delivery. It's been accepted by who? Because this is an expensive item, and I want to make sure there is a peace of mind on both sides. Same thing for the handset. Well, I want to make sure it gets certified, but I could use one of the two vendors because it's not required a baked item. It can go through the USPS, or it could go through the FedEx. So when you give this kind of examples, right, then they can start using it. So, okay, now as I build my product catalog, I can look into it and say, hey, is the system, essentially, if I select these two items, is it performing this method to the delivery? And then I can say, yes, it sent it to the USPS, yes, it's sent to the FedEx for shipment. Then I know the system is working, right? So this gives two ways. It gives you ability to, within example, to see it, what rules I need to build it, right? So there is an indirect rules that are coming it out from the example that now you can have a conversation with the end user and says, hey, so you're saying that anything which is a big items, which is expensive items, you want to send it through certified mailman, right? Yes, and it should always go to FedEx, yes or no?
So
Right?
we fill in the, all the details, or you?
No,
fill it
you talk with them and say, hey, let's talk through an
open
example.
for them
Right.
to choose what they want.
Right, so you ask them question based on the examples, right? This is close-ended example. If I do this, will it go through the USPS? Will it go through certified mail or uncertified mail? Normally. And then you build this table, right? Give the specification, right? So you take an example and then ask the user to walk through it. As they walk through it, you jot it down.
You're setting up rules as you.
Right, so as you are hearing what they're saying, it is you pull that, build this table, and then you just say,
Yeah, put
okay,
down options
based
to
on this
choose
table, this is what I understood that needs to be done. Are you in agreement? Did I get it right or not always, right? So now then you have to add some more example to consider that not always scenario. Right. So the more examples and the discussion you have it, the better clarity you will start having it. Instead of just having a discussion, say, hey, if it's a book, you should do this. If it's this, then you do this. Versus if you have an example, now you can clearly visualize what is happening, right? And then when you have the systems and you want to test it, you can just run through this example and say, does it do it for this example?
So is this like a next step after what we just did, like the questions that we asked?
It could be part of it. It could be as the further detail, right? As you get into further detail requirements, right?
Yeah, so that
I could also have use the same technique to understand from Herschel as what are the ways the patient registration process will get started. Let's an example. If a nurse comes in, what if a doctor's referral comes? Well, what would it look like? It will start it. What if same doctor's referral comes in, but it's an information about the treatment? Do I start a new registration process or use existing one? So it gives you an ability to say, hey, how do I start a new patient registration? Or do you look for an existing and ask for a renewal? Or I just update it only? So if you look at the top of the form that he was showing, there were 5 categories, right? The new registration, this and that.
Yeah.
Well, how do I know which one to use it in what scenario? What the input will come and where does it should go take me, right? So when somebody's going to call the nurse, right, and with that scenario, well, nurse needs to know which screen it needs to go to, right? So you know, hey, if nurse goes by default to patient registration, you should be able to pull it up and say, hey, wait a minute, this is patients already exist in the systems. Do you mean that you want to do this? And then guide them. I don't know, right?
So is it good to start narrowing it down in that session itself?
Right. So this is, remember when I was talking about the close-ended question as you go through it and becoming much more specific? This is the kind of
Could
techniques you
start
can use.
saving time also, I think.
Right. But that's right. So you have to prepare it, right? You have to set
Yes.
the stage of how I'm going to use it, that, right? And when do I use this technique? You can't just use it and say, hey, what all functions you want to do it? But hey, when you start this particular process, what if I get this type of phone call? What if I get this type of phone call? Or what if I get this referral? What should I do? Then that's a good example to do it specification by example. Okay. Then another technique is the use case diagram, right? So you will see it, that's when there's a lot of times people just say it's stick figures, right? So in this case, you identify who the actor is, right? So who is the actual end user? All the end users who are working the systems are actors. But then you have to understand is, hey, what actor will be able to do what goals in the system, right? And do they access to the system or do they do it as outside the system? Right. So in this one, you can have it, for example, a nurse. It says what all functions they do it, right? So they can have a track daily activity. They do have patient registrations. What other things they can do it? So with every user type that is identified, if you identify this use case diagram, now it all of a sudden becomes clear who can do what kind of role, what kind of functions you can do it. So when somebody on the IT side looks at it, right, they can just say, hey, does nurse can do this also? Can nurse do billing? And the answer is no. Then they make sure that the nurse cannot see the options, many options that goes refers about the billing. They need to put the security around it, right? So one of the things that I would advise that all of you is based on what you understood and what's the requirement so far, right? Build a use case diagram. You have all the different users that we talked about, right? Stakeholders we talked about, right? In this one, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 people, right? Draw a use case diagram for each one of them. It says what functions they will be able to do it, right? And then we can validate that on Thursday. Hey, this nurse can do this, this, this. Can they do it? Right? It's simple. You can just draw it on like it's a PowerPoint or Visio or whatever when you have it.
Okay.
You'll be sending this one to us, right?
Yeah, Harshal will send you this document to walk you through it. You can just take a snapshot. Okay. So, any questions in terms of what we covered today? Let's talk about that before going into what you need to do between now and Thursday.
About use case diagrams, we're just supposed to bifurcate upon what are the performance or activities they can perform,
Yeah.
right?
So each actor, right? So for each actor, figure out, like, so you see it, a lot of information, we already started capturing it, right?
But there are more too.
There
so
could be
just
more,
add to-
right? So that's what you need to look through it and say, hey, is this everything that they do it?
So for that information, like billing user, if I need to look into it more, do I Google it or do I refer more to my?
You're no longer Googling now,
Okay.
because it's the scope, right? What is the scope
He's
of
scared of
the
our Googling.
thing? That might not be a bad idea, but what it is Googling is to understand the terminology.
Right.
Okay.
When you're talking about the scope, you always refer back to your business cases.
Scope and what the discussion happened between.
Right.
Harsh and us.
She's no more on Googling
Yeah,
now.
I'm not
She's
Googling.
kind of narrowed down the document.
You saw my diagram, right?
सारे बुलबुलें मेरे तो सिर्फ 4 ही है.
She doesn't understand the concept of budget on the IT side.
She just wanted to impress the.
No, we just had a discussion yesterday. Usually she's the one who digs really deep and finds a tunnel somewhere, and I am like
Much
too
more
much of
focused
a
on
comprehensive look. But this time we did kind of a
Roller
role
coaster.
reversal.
So the way I see it is, unless you go on a complete extreme, how do you know that you need to swing back the pendulum?
But at least it's an improvement, right? We are changing ourselves a little bit. So.
Well, the other day we were discussing, and when we were discussing, I kind of got the sense of it that the pink bubbles were not important, they were not directly impacted, and that's not what you're looking for, and that's why I just stuck to the blue bubbles. Not necessarily all of them were correct, but still,
Yeah.
That was the gist I got from that.
Yeah, it's again, it's always, you have to balance the need. Like, do you go through extreme age and then narrow it down, the scope? Or you start with a small and grow as needed?
See, that's my
I'm
point.
always
like-
prefer it, start with small and grow as
Go in
needed.
the direction
The
you
two
want to go.
reasons for that. One is the smaller, it's easy for you to comprehend. It's an easy for you to communicate this, right? And at least you can show it certain value. If you try to get everything that, right, then it becomes very hard to kind of comprehend, get a clear picture in the mind, as well as trying to identify what is in the scope and what is not in the scope.
With the Afron one, I was an extreme. I like kind of overlooked a lot of things. With this one, I just dig too much deeper. So I'll find a
Which is
middle
okay,
ground.
right? So it's
I'm
a
gonna
kind
find a
of
middle
finding the
ground, that's
balance, right? It's finding the balance.
Yeah.
But like it's, as I said, it's based on my experience. I'm a conservative person, so I'm always tends to go smaller, focus on what I can manage with it, and then grow it as I need it. Right, so if you look at it, right, so I kind of kept it only 4. And then as we discuss it, right, we can just grow it more. As we talk with the nurses, hey, there's more functional needed, let's just add that. It's much more easier. But now the reference comes at is with the end user is, this is what we started with. This is what additional things. Are you in agreement with the additional things? Yes, no? It's much more easier to narrow it down. Also, more the bubble you put in, the more discussion needs to happen to figure it out whether you need it or not.
I'll find a middle ground someday.
It's a learning process. Okay, so couple of things, right? So the use case diagram, any questions on the use case diagram? What do you need to do it between now and Thursday?
We have to just define all of these users.
Yeah, for all the 4 users, define the use case diagrams.
Yeah.
Okay. Second thing you need to do it is the information that you captured it by talking with Herschel, and the information that he was going to send you an email that he told you that I'll send you all this thing. You do the analysis of those things and then figure it out. You review that information and identify the gaps. Identify if you need an additional clarity, or let's jot down the questions so we can have those questions to Herschel on Thursday, and then you can capture that information. Because the goal is now we started building the small pieces of together of the overall requirements document or picture. Let's start getting all of that integrated into one as we go through it.
In the use case, those bubbles, can they be interlinked or?
When you
just
say interlink,
specific?
I would just keep it simple initially.
Simple and specific.
It is per user, let's identify the functions. Then we can look into it. Okay, if there is the same function that this user is able to do it and this user is also able to do it, then we can collapse it and just here are all the functionals and here are the people who can access it.
Okay.
Right, initially keep it simple as we go through it. Now, we are not meeting next Saturday, right, Herschel? So we meet
Yeah, that's
next Sunday, right? But we are still meeting on Thursday at 6:30.
Yes.
We will continue to talk through the 2 things that we talked about, right? So now that you have an opportunity to gather more information, go back, right? So I want you to think through all those different types of questioning and then put a structure and list of questions of how would you get what you needed from Herschel in an organized manner. And we'll just use one by one this time. We did the team approach because I wanted you to see it that like it's, hey, you still need a little bit more organization as you go through it, right? And the method of understanding it's how you go from top to bottom or what scenario, what type of questioning you will use it to get the specific information out. So now it's continue to practice those things. Right?
So the homework is to the use case diagram and the questions we need to organize and ask him for the same
Right.
exercise we did. And
But organize your information that you collected so far as well as what you get it from him to understand it, right?
Okay.
So I would anticipate, hey, for patient registration system, here are the different ways it can get started. Here are the information needs to be captured. Here is what happens when you're done with the patient registration.
So more like a requirement.
Right, a requirement
You're starting at
organization,
double.
right, yeah. Also, maybe you may just want to, like, it's organize and flag it based on a different type. Is this a technical requirement? Is this a business requirement? Is it a general requirement?
So we don't have to include the questions which we already got answers for. Is that
Yeah,
what you
yeah.
meant to say?
Yeah, so don't ask the same question, right? That's the rule that we say
No,
that.
I was just thinking that I was in a wrong track because I thought that you want us to make a document which the answers which has been already been, questions with the
Yes.
answers already been answered, and then
Right.
you want us to add more questions to that. Is
Right,
that
so
what
if you
want us
feel
to
the
do?
gap, is there a gap? So as you put together all this information, you may say, hey, I don't know this. I need to have answer from that.
Also look at the
That's what
information
he
I'm sending
means.
you,
Yes.
right?
That's what it means.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also look at the forms that
Yeah,
I'm
that's
sending you,
what-
see
and
if there are
Yeah.
any questions,
that
other
generates more
questions or
questions.
anything
Right.
like that. And so forth.
The goal is, do you have, when you're done with it, do you have all the information needed for patient registration?
Okay.
That you can give it to somebody and says, okay, if you build a system, they will be able to build a system based on the information you provided that enables them to do the patient registration. Okay, and we'll have to repeat the same scenario for all the different categories that he talked about, right? So there is a patient registration, there is a patient encounter, right? Then there is a visit. All those things you need to capture it, which is in the requirements document. Then.
Each point we're gonna,
We're
It's
going
the
to follow the
same.
same process,
Okay.
right, for each point.
Yeah.
Let's just get the first one ready so that you know, hey, I can do this
Hmm.
implementation. Okay. Good?
And we are running on Sunday.
Marshall, do you have anything else to add?
No, I'm sending you guys the template, right? That's where you can fill in, and I'll send you like open source tool as well where you can drive. If you don't want to use PowerPoint, just use some tools. There you go,
Okay.
to create the diagram.
what is the name of the tool you said?
There are a couple of tools I will send you that in the email. They are open source, so they are.
It's a freeware version that you can download it and then
And
utilize
also you
that.
will also be sending the recording by tomorrow, right? So that-
Yeah, recording I'll probably send to you, maybe tonight or tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording, Herschel, on this one now.